Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD, bringing you stories from around the world and also within Pakistan, discussing different angles of the stories, making sure that you get all the information that you need to know something about something. When we talk about different stories from around the world, something really important that comes up is, of course, the situation that has been going on in India. Prime Minister Imran Khan has also taken notice of that and has tweeted with regards to what is going on in India, saying that under the extremist ideology of the BJP Modi government, all the religious minorities in India have been targeted with impunity by the Hindutva groups, and this extremist agenda of the Modi government is a real and present threat to peace in our region. He's also spoken about the response of the international community, saying that they must act now, and also that the continuing silence of the government in India points towards the fact that they are actually responsible and complicit. He specifically mentions the particular incidents of the video that also went viral, in which there was an extremist Hindutva summit that was held on the 22nd of December last year for genocide of minorities in India, especially the 200 million Muslim community that lives in the country. And they spoke about how people should fight, even kill the Muslims in India to put forward their agenda of establishing a Hindu Rashtra. We've seen early this year as well, in January, another such video coming out of a village in which people are taking oath for not doing any sort of business transactions with Muslims, also harassing them in the neighborhood and also not allowing them as tenants in their property. Of course, a lot of this is something that has been going on for a while. We see so many such videos coming out, but the scale and level of such videos keeps on increasing, and the silence is very deafening that comes not only from the government in India, but also from the international community. And this is what the Prime Minister said. It is high time that the international community took note and acted. What really still needs to be done about that to make sure that somebody actually calls India out for its actions? We'll explore that in further detail. In our next segment, we will be taking a look at the situation in Afghanistan. Since the Taliban have taken power in the country, there is so much that is being involved in terms of what is going on both within Afghanistan, how the international community is reacting, what needs to be done in terms of humanitarian aid and economic assistance in Afghanistan, and then of course the call for inclusivity for the Taliban government to be able to recognize, among other things. In a recent development, we know that the foreign minister, the acting foreign minister of Afghanistan, along with the delegation, has visited Tehran, the first of such visit. He has met with the foreign minister in Iran. He's also met with the Iranian president's special envoy for Afghanistan, and various issues have been discussed, including bilateral issues, including call for the assets to be for the United States that have frozen the assets to remove the blockage, and they've also called on for humanitarian assistance in Afghanistan. Furthermore, we've also seen that discussions on Iran's water rights from the Helmand River were also something that came under discussion, and then of course emphasis was laid on continuing the frequency of these talks. However, Iran has categorically stated that it will not be officially recognizing the Taliban regime until and unless there is an inclusive government in Afghanistan. At the same time, we see that the situation that is going on in Afghanistan and the kind of steps that the Taliban regime have been taking are not very encouraging. So we'll explore this in further detail, how this visit actually impacts the situation and whether or not it is a development towards a more peaceful Afghanistan. Before we start on our first segment, let's take a small look at a report prepared by our team, and then we'll be introducing the guests for our discussion.
In a tweet, PM Imran Khan raised concerns about an extremist Hindutva summit and Muslims living in India. He pondered that the Hindutva summit held in India, which called for the genocide of the Muslim, marks a clear question whether BJP government and Modi support such calls or not. Modi's silence on these events promoting hate speech and religious extremism against minorities is alarming. He also called for international community to act and take notice on this. Religious extremism is on the rise in India ever since BJP-led Hindu nationalist government came to power under the leadership of Narendra Modi. India claims to be a secular nation, but in Modi's India, the echoes of the Nazi Germany are growing louder. The Hindutva ideology in Modi's fascist regime has created chaos in India for religious minorities. The situation of Muslims in India is dire at a tipping point. In December 2021, a three-day Hindutva summit against Muslims was organized, which was attended by the ruling party leaders. In that summit, Hindu nationalist leaders were seen encouraging people to boycott and commit genocide of Muslims. They were calling for mass killings and use of lethal force and weapons against Muslims. Such events and silence of leaders raises many alarm bells for minorities in India.
Well, you saw the report. For further discussion on this, we have been joined in the studios by Mr. Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal, as usual. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. And online, we've also been joined by two very respected guests. We have been joined by Sami Hamdi, who's a senior analyst, and we've also been joined by Sukhminder Singh Hansra, who's a senior journalist. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us on the debate. I'll start with you, Mr. Sami. When we speak about the situation in India, it is simultaneously shocking and not so shocking as well when we see so many times such incidents coming out and bringing us to light the kind of discrimination, the kind of violence, the kind of treatment that the minorities, especially Muslims in India, have been receiving. It is quite terrorizing and disappointing. But what is more disappointing, of course, is the fact that nothing seems to be done about it. There seems to be no consequence. Even as the kind of incidents that we see are becoming more and more blatant, such as the video that has come out with the oath taking of actively taking an oath to terrorize, to fight against, even kill Muslims in India. Such blatant acts surely call for some sort of response or condemnation, at least from the international community. Why is that? Even though now a lot of this is not being held under any sort of disguise or under any sort of garb, is that the kind of response we get from the international community is still the same?
Thank you very much for having me. I think that one of the first things that's worth stressing is that, one, this is not a new problem with regards to India. And as you alluded to yourself, Modi has exacerbated this particular issue as a result of coming to power. We saw when he was governor of Gujarat, there were always question marks and suspicions that his attitudes towards the Muslims might be one that might be quite simply xenophobic. And now that he is on the major platform as India goes through an economic crisis, he's chosen his enemy that we've often seen these right-wing regimes do. He's chosen his enemy. The enemy in this case is the Muslim, and he's rallied his supporters at least against those Muslims and essentially provided some sort of blanket impunity to these mobs that are roaming around, that are killing the Muslims, and videoing it and finding no sort of accountability whatsoever for their actions. What I do want to stress before continuing on this topic is that it's important to stress that many Indians are against what Modi is doing. Many Indians on Facebook, on social media, come out and condemn what Modi's supporters are doing to the Muslim community. Many of them are Hindus specifically, saying that Hinduism does not condone this kind of thing. And we've seen many MPs come out and condemn what BJP supporters are doing to the Muslim minorities. But it's also important to stress that Modi's emerging allies, international allies, are those who believe that there is a genuine issue of fear towards Muslim populations. We see that he's getting closer with the likes of the UAE, the likes of Israel, the likes of other countries that have made Islamophobia one of the hallmarks of their foreign policies and indeed their domestic policies. And of course, these are advisors who tell Modi that he is justified in his fear of Muslims. He's justified that Muslims are a problem in society, and therefore he should be clamping down on them. The reality is that what's taking place in India is horrific. It borders on genocide if it essentially increases in its magnitude. We see that there is a lack of accountability for these things. Modi will not be applying that accountability, primarily because he believes that it's something his supporters want to do. There have been videos of BJP supporters speaking to police chiefs and speaking to the authorities, saying to them, we are counting on you to help us in containing this Muslim population. But it's also important to stress, and I finish on this point before handing over, that in times of economic crisis, these social tensions tend to thrive. The social tensions tend to be exacerbated. Modi needs an excuse for why the Indian economy is struggling. He needs an excuse to tell the Indians why the economy is not doing so well. And for Modi, the best distraction that he has come up with for now is to say that, look, we have a common enemy. It is the Muslim sections of society. Go after them. And for now, at least among BJP supporters, it appears to be working.
Right, but when we speak about the kind of motivations that are there behind Modi's actions and the way you talked about how he can justify it or his government can justify what they're doing, the kind of responses now that we're seeing coming in from the public within India, and of course, as you said, there may be people who are of course raising their voice against it as well, but the larger public, of course, is coming up with such incidents. We see so many people following the same sort of ideology, and the scary bit is that they perhaps also feel it's justified without the kind of political or economic motivations that the Modi government may have. And that perhaps is an enemy that's brewing, which is much harder to fight. How are we supposed to tackle that, Mr. Sukhminder?
Good morning. But the point is, it's Indian culture. It's a Hindu Tava culture. To suppress the minorities in order to succeed in their own endeavors. Endeavor is now 5 states of elections, and of course the economical aspect, as my friend has said. The utmost disturbing thing is that in 2022, these people can get away with such a notion that the Muslims will not be eliminated by swords, so you need better equipment, better weapons at home, so buy better weapons. How can you preach something like that publicly, and the government is doing nothing about it? Exactly what he has done to Punjab trip last week. Just to get ahead in the polls, he blamed the security lapse and turned back for no reason. And these are the drama queen guys. They make dramas in order to. This is exactly what Indira Gandhi used to do. Now exactly what Narendra Modi is doing.
Hansa Sahab, we know that the organization and the political organization you belong to, Shrimani Akali Dal, it supports Muslims inside India as well and outside as well. When it comes to rights of the Kashmiri people or rights of the Muslims, whenever there is something going on against Islam or against Muslims in India, we have seen that Sikh brothers, they always come forward and they stand with them. We have examples when abrogation of 370 and 35A took place. In the aftermath of that, when university and college students, they were trying to get back to their houses, they were facing problems, and Sikh youth, they helped them out. And we know for the fact that in the Western world, wherever there is a protest related to Kashmir, of course, from your side, you people are always standing with them. Do you think that right now, whatever we are seeing against Sikhism in Punjab and in India, I mean, recently there were, Hindutva ideology was pinning them down as well, and there were rules coming against you as well. Do you think that this is taking place just because of one reason, that you are always standing with the Muslims?
Well, that's probably not the only reason. It's Sikhism's mandate to stand with underdog. It's simple as that. And every Sikh, when there was a COVID and people couldn't find oxygen, they didn't ask them whether you were a Muslim or a Hindu or somebody else. They provided oxygen to them. As a matter of fact, many of the bodies, the dead bodies who were not claimed by the families of their own during the COVID were cremated by Sikhs. So it's a mandate. I would rather draw that conclusion that it's a mandate. But yes, one thing is very clear, that in India, with their Hindutva agenda, they know that the Punjab will not let them get away with it. It's simple as that. As you see in the farmers' agitation, it was only Punjab who actually stood up against them and forced them to bend their knees. And their agenda of a Hindu Tawa or Hindu Rashtra is not going to be completed until they sort of destabilize Punjab. And it's not easy because they know when during the emergency only Punjab stood up against Indira Gandhi. Now only Punjab stood against Delhi regime. Delhi and Punjab never look eye to eye. That's a historical thing. You know, when it was Mughals, when it was British, now it's the Hindus. Punjab and Delhi never get along, and it's not going to get along either now, because Punjab itself has an what am I supposed to say? Punjab thinks that they are sovereign, despite that they are governed by New Delhi, but their sovereignty is embedded in them. It's, you know, nobody's training them for it. So that sovereignty is what stands against this New Delhi regime.
Right. Farrukh, earlier Sami was speaking about how there are saner voices in India. And we've spoken about this before, about how the people within India themselves need to have a different voice as well, perhaps to be more influential in terms of changing the opinions and minds of people. Are there enough of these voices, or even if there are they increasing? Isn't there a huge price to pay for people who are actually coming out and speaking against the Modi regime? How do we sort of encourage them or have a more coordinated stance coming in from these people in India?
Right, and price is perhaps the word that actually defines everything at this moment. I think they are good people, and usually in a democracy or a country that has been a democracy, majority is good. But we have seen with Nazi Germany, elsewhere as well, gradually all these people succumb to some kind of pressure or fear for their own lives. And that has been happening here as well. Before I actually focus on this matter though, there is a very subtle disclaimer that I just wanted to point out. Earlier, while talking about, Islamophobia, one of our honorable guests actually brought up a country that is brotherly to Pakistan. The UAE, I don't know any country, any Muslim country, why would it actually indulge in any kind of Islamophobia? I just wanted to highlight that it is his personal opinion, not of the state channel. But regarding what we were saying earlier, regarding India, there are voices. For example, when you look at their television, you will be surprised to find 0 voices that are actually raising it, right? But then there is a website called thewire.in, right? It is a news website. It is a very, very progressive and vocal website, and it has been facing too much backlash from Narendra Modi and his goons, and that has been happening for quite some time. I know that a lot of Indian expatriates also watch this program when we are talking. I don't know whether financially any foreigner can help this website out, but they are reeling under the financial pressure. So if you are an Indian and if you are watching it, and if you believe in a pluralistic democracy, perhaps thewire.in needs your help. Regarding one more thing, and that is just to appreciate the moment we are in. A book recently came out, and that is an amazing book, Sana. You have to actually read it. It is called Gandhi's Assassin by Jitendra Jha. And the great thing about this book is that Nathuram Godse, who actually killed, Gandhi, the founder of India, that person was usually, it was said that he was part of Hindu Mahasabha, he was not part of RSS. But this book actually meticulously traces how that man continued to be part of RSS. So at this moment, what is happening? RSS is the party or the organization that effectively killed the founder of India, Mahatma Gandhi, right? This is like perhaps if tomorrow somebody from the clan or family of the assassin of Lincoln, although Washington it could be, but Washington was not killed in this fashion. They were to become the president of the US.
Yeah.
We would then know that the entire American Revolution has been nullified. So whatever India was, is and will be has been cancelled out by the fact that the terrorists who killed the founder of India, the chief leader of India, they are ruling the country. So now it is not like climate is, somehow contaminated. When some poison is in air, but in a part of air, then you say it is contaminated.
Yeah.
When the entire building is made of that poison, when you are sitting on the chairs made of that poison, when table, food, air, everything is that poison, then you don't call it contamination, you say that this is poison. Today, India is there. And I don't know how it will come back.
Right, but perhaps, Farrukh, these truths are buried so deep under what is going on, under the kind of things that are being propagated and spoken about, and the kind of things that people are facing in their daily lives, that perhaps no one is really looking that deeply to try and understand what's going on, or the fact that they're being fed so much misinformation that it's even hard to sort of differentiate between what's going on and what has been happening in the past. Sami, when we speak about this, of course, this is one of the biggest weapons that the Indian regime has used, and so many times they've been exposed in terms of a coordinated effort to have such kind of campaigns going on, to forming opinion, influencing decisions both within India and outside. Again, this is something that is also not just restricted to India. It's something that the entire world faces, and is something that they all need to act upon. But the kind of things that have come out from within India as well, do you think that any sort of counter campaign is there for people who are raising their voices, for people who are standing up, even the minorities or other organizations? Are they doing something to be able to call out that this is what's okay and this is what actually happened?
I think there's a very strange dynamic that is at play here, which is the differing versions of how India emerged from colonization, how Pakistan emerged, and the trauma that is still there. And as much as I thought, at least as an outsider, believing that somehow people had moved past this, the reality is that I, growing up in London in a very Indian-dominated community, was very surprised at how many Indians reacted to Modi's rise to power. There was this celebration of a Hindu identity, celebration of this Hindu nationalism from people who had never before displayed that sort of Hindu nationalism or indeed that Hindu identity. And I think where Modi has emphatically failed is in essentially presenting to the world what Hindu governance looks like. He claims that he is a paragon of Hinduism and that his supporters are promoting the idea of Hinduism and its manifestation in politics. And instead what we're seeing is something that is completely different to what anybody was taught about Hinduism. We're not seeing any economic development. There's no justice. There's no freedoms. There's clampdown on minorities. There's oppression. There's corruption and the like. So if Modi was seeking, or at least those who supported Modi were seeking to present some sort of model for governance that essentially disassociates from India's Muslim history, where the Mughals ruled and the Hindus remained the majority, and there was no necessarily a mass scaling, at least, of trying to force a conversion. The reality is that Modi has failed significantly in this. With regards to your question, with regards to Indians in terms of campaigns that can go against what is taking place, the reason I start with the narratives is because what Modi represents is that these scars from the 1940s, from the 1950s, are still very much alive, whether we see it through cricket matches when Pakistan and India are playing with one another, and when Pakistani and Indian cricket members are seen shaking hands with one another, it causes a furor and anger amongst BJP supporters and amongst Hindu supporters. But that also is an example of what your question is asking. We saw in the Indian-Pakistan cricket match how the players were transcending those hate and division that Modi wants to spread in India. We're seeing MPs in parliament come out on Facebook, writing articles on social media saying Modi does not represent me. We're seeing Indian citizens come out publicly and saying what's happening is horrific. It doesn't represent my India. This doesn't mean that we can gauge this as a majority or a minority or the like. The reality is this is now a test for Indian democracy as to whether Modi will win another term or not, as to whether this is such a fundamental issue for Indians that it will result in the fall of Narendra Modi with regards to his power. And I think that's what many those at least who respect human rights will be hoping that the Indians will teach a lesson to Modi to essentially say that India is more than your racist Hindutva ideology. You don't represent what Hinduism is. You don't represent what India is. Of course, that sounds very hopeful. But what is clear is that social media has brought these issues to the fore. People are seeing it with their own eyes. People are seeing the horrific videos of a Muslim man being made to get on his knees on the road and being forced to kiss the feet or kiss the ground in front of these mobs that support Modi. But to answer your question directly, I think there are movements taking place. These movements should be highlighted. They should be encouraged. There should be dialogue. There should be encouragement, because what Modi wants is war between these different groups of society. He wants this violence to continue. He needs this hate in order to win. And it's about everybody else trying to counter that hate by asserting that dialogue, by asserting India is more than the hate that Modi wants to preach.
Brother Sami, just an extension of the question. Looking at the history, Prime Minister of Pakistan time and again highlighted the issue of Modi and tried to tell the world that it is resembling or it can be considered as a Nazism part 2. And looking at the today's fact, when people are, Hindutva ideology is promoting no business, no relations with the Muslims in India, don't we see it happening same as 1930s when people were doing the same over there as well? Nazis were doing the same in Germany, and then we saw the Nuremberg laws coming out and shunning the Jews. And Prime Minister Imran Khan time and again highlighted it, and today's obviously West is not highlighting it the way it should be highlighting it. Why they're not highlighting it now? If they do, wouldn't it be possible for the world to stop all of this?
Perhaps Mr. Hansra, you can answer that.
Yeah.
Well, one thing you got to understand: the West is very opportunist nowadays. They choose their words, they choose their steps against India, so they won't hurt their own economic interests. Unfortunately, that is the case. My friend hopes that the Indians will teach lesson to Narendra Modi in next upcoming elections. You're very hopeful, but I have no hopes on this guy. और जिस तरह कहते हैं ना, कारवा को किसने लूटा ये खुदा जाने, मगर राह के नक्शे कदम में रह के पहचाने गए. ये जो नक्शे कदम Hindu Tawa is out to get minorities in order to make that Hindu Rashtra, and read the Hindu Tawa policy in detail, you will understand that when BJP became the sole governing body in India, and they adopted Hindu Tawa policy, and they're moving towards it, and they know, and they know the challenges they will face. Punjab is the biggest challenge, as long as I understand, because the Muslim population in India, they failed to stand up against them during the CAA and all those other abrogations, 370 in Kashmir. The challenge, you have to build the challenge in order for these goons to run away. They cannot stand a foot in Punjab. They know that. And Modi had to turn back from his rally in Punjab last week. Though he said it was a security lapse. There was no security lapse. There was nobody there to listen to him. 70,000 empty chairs. Who is going to address? Nobody. That is the reality that how Punjab people think, that he's not our prime minister. So, it's, I have written a letter to our External Affairs Minister of Canada yesterday. I'm sure your office has a copy of it. And I told them, they're talking about next, another genocide of 6 because Modi was returned from Punjab without addressing the political rally. Justin Trudeau faced protest many times in his way and had to turn back or change his route. So, well, it's a big deal. In democracy, these things do happen.
For sure.
But But talking about the sex will face another 1984, that's not going to happen, my friend. In 1984, you
Right.
took us for granted. We were sleeping and you come and butchered us. Now sects are not
Right.
sleeping in India. They will cause the same damage, if not more.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mr.
Can
Hansra
I make
and
a
Sami.
comment to
Yes,
that?
quickly. We're almost out of time.
My
Yes,
apologies.
Sami.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the Western approach, it's important to highlight two trends. The first is that we've seen that France has been exacerbating Islamophobia in Europe, promoting the term Islamic terrorism as opposed to just terrorism as a neutral term. And he's being supported in this, or he has found allies in this, even in some Muslim countries, such as some of those that I mentioned earlier. But the second thing to assert is that for the Western states, what's important to stress is that for them, India is viewed only insofar as it is useful in disciplining Pakistan, which has been increasingly independent in its foreign policy, and indeed in pushing back against China. These are far greater priorities for the Western states than calling out India on its repression of the Muslims. And I think this is the tragedy of what's unfolding with regards to the attitudes of the international community.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Mr. Sami, for being with us and sharing your views. Yes, quickly, Farrukh.
Yeah, all this actually seems to be an outcome of one dirty, filthy book. And that book is actually Huntington's Clash of Civilizations.
Yes.
It is the logical culmination point of that everywhere. Islamic terrorism, Hindutva terrorism, everything else, right? But let me very humbly submit that it actually forces me to actually do something that I've been restraining for past 20 years, to actually finish the book I was writing as a rebuttal of Clash of Civilizations.
Oh, really?
Regarding India, see dissenters, how they are silenced. Gauri Lankesh, whosoever is actually watching should just look up. She was killed on point blank in front of her own house just because she was criticizing this man. Sanjeev Bhatt, a policeman who actually in Gujarat actually pointed out that Modi was responsible for killing people, and he was there, he was in the room. That guy has been actually sent to jail on trumped up charges for the life. And similarly, Teesta Setalwad, a lawyer who stood with Muslims in Gujarat, has been hounded beyond anybody's imagination. How do you come back from that?
Never.
I have no idea, Farrukh, and that, of course, is a big question that remains to be seen. What really happens? Of course, we've seen that people are hopeful and some are without hope. But let's see and hope for the best, because that's all what one can do at the moment. For further discussion on the situation in Afghanistan, the Taliban regime, and their visit to Iran, we've been joined by Mr. Tariq Farhadi, who is an Afghan affairs expert. Always a pleasure to have you on the debate, Mr. Farhadi. Welcome to the show. We, of course, want to discuss the situation in Afghanistan with particular reference to their visit to Iran. This is one of the first visits that the Taliban regime have had, a delegation-level visit to Iran, which was a discussion regarding their bilateral ties, regarding various issues in terms of calling for humanitarian assistance, calling for the assets the blockage to be removed from those assets, and of course, other issues also came under discussion. However, the main issue still remains there, which of course is recognizing the Taliban regime, and that has been stated that is not going to happen unless there is an inclusive government. With the way that we've seen this particular visit come around and the kind of discussions that have followed and the reality that still exists, do you think that this has any sort of significance in the way forward for Afghanistan in itself and the Taliban regime as the current government in the country?
Well, greetings to everyone. Little significance, but Iran was able to show leverage because it was a surprise to see Ahmad Massoud, the son of the late Commander Massoud, in Iran, meeting with Taliban. So that means that Iran also has leverage. In fact, Afghanistan's neighbors pretty much all have leverage over Afghanistan in one way or another.
All right. When we talk about of course, the meeting that has taken place, there has been statements coming in from the Taliban regime saying that any sort of leaders of any sort of resistance movements are welcome in the country, and they have nothing to worry about if they will wish to return. With regards to the kind of involvement or engagement that they will have with other resistance leaders, or in the near future, do we see any steps forward for any sort of reconciliation between these groups and the Taliban regime? Do you think that was a step forward in that direction?
It was a step forward because we generally fight in Afghanistan, and for once opposites met around the table. So that was a step forward, that we have to transform our culture and talk to each other. But what the Taliban really mean is you can come back to Afghanistan and stay in your home and do not engage in any political activity. That's what they have done to Mr. Karzai and Mr. Abdullah. So basically, it's a very empty promise. You can come, nobody will bother you as long as you don't get involved in politics. But what Afghanistan needs really is a government that's 50% non-Taliban. Not necessarily these figures that they met today, but people who are non-Taliban, experts, women, people from all walks of life in Afghanistan who have educated themselves in the last 20 years, and now because the Taliban is a very closed group, and that I gave the message to Mr. Mutaki through an interview today, is open up your heart, because God has created all the cosmos in a way that there is room for everybody, and open the government. It will make the government more solid if others also can come. We're all interested in helping Afghanistan go through this crisis time.
Right, and that's good advice, but I'm not too sure if it's going to be well taken or if any action is going to be taken on it. We've seen the kind of measures that the Taliban regime have recently been taking seems to be that they're actually moving in a direction that is the opposite of moving towards inclusivity or opening their hearts.
Yes and no. We have to keep telling them,
okay.
But we have to tell them in a good tone. You see, they're not used to a lot of criticism. They put in prison an old man, 73, 74-year-old, who had made some nasty comments on social media. And they're also, my message to them is, look, you have to release this guy, because if something happens to him in your custody, then it will look even worse. God forbid. So, you Taliban, you're saying you're superior to anybody. So why do you fear the others?
Brother Tariq, we know for a fact that there are concerns over, Afghan land not to be used against any other country, and of course, Iran has them kind of problems as well. They had in past, and still they have, especially in shape of presence of ISIS Khorasan in Nangarhar and Kunar provinces. And we in Pakistan, we have the same concerns about ISIS Khorasan and TTP, because TTP is housing the ISIS Khorasan, and ISIS Khorasan is housing TTP wherever they get a chance. And in between, obviously, the Uzbekistan Islamic movement is with ISIS Khorasan as well. So don't you think that this issue will be of huge importance while we had foreign minister of Taliban in Iran? Don't you think that they will be talking about that as well?
They have, but we cannot expect too much from Taliban. I'm well aware of the worries that our neighbors have, but the Taliban cannot afford to alienate too many people right now. They are trying to control the country. Yes, there are elements who are more extreme. There is TTP, there is Daesh, there is ISIS, there is the Uzbekistan movements. But if they alienate them and they put pressure, they will get busy with a fight that really doesn't help them gain control over the country right now. So it's really asking Taliban for too much, but without the resources, without too many means.
Mr. Farhadi, when you say that the Taliban, of course, need to be sure that they don't aggravate anybody, does this mean that they also need to watch their tone when they're interacting with the international community, just as they need to be sugarcoating everything with the Taliban?
The international community needs to really help the people of Afghanistan by lifting the sanctions. Because now the fact that there are sanctions, poverty will create even more enemies amongst the normal people for Taliban. And that's when there's a risk that Taliban might become violent and do knee-jerk reactions, just like they put an old man in prison because he had made a few nasty...
And that is quite a piece of news, by the way. Before Sana and I kept on waiting that you are going to come to me, and I just get crashed right now. Before I do that, I had to actually get crashed because I have a compliment for Farhadi Saab. Whenever he comes to this program, he brings a lot of insight, and he also brings this beautiful smile that actually brightens our screen. Thank you very much, sir, for doing that.
Absolutely.
But regarding this whole report, Sana, I think that I feel that we are reading it in the wrong direction.
Okay.
We keep on looking at what Afghan Taliban are doing and what exactly is happening. I think it is time to actually recognize one big player in Afghanistan, that is Iran. Pakistan's policy, because Pakistan has repeatedly been actually, blamed for certain things and whatnot. Pakistan's policy seems to be a Punjabi, adage that actually roughly translates into eating all the onions and getting thrashed. But with due respect, when it comes to Iran, Iran has been playing very important role. Remember the Taliban's head who was assassinated in Pakistan's border areas through the drone strike? He was actually coming from Iran at that time. Later on as well, when Doha dialogue was going on, at that time Pakistani authorities and Western authorities used to brief us, and at that time repeatedly we kept on asking about the weapon trail, and at least Pakistani side said that we are not doing it, ask where it is coming from. And then it was actually pointed out to us that it was Iran that was handing them a lot of weaponry, right? So at this moment, Iran can play a very vital role, and one should be actually hoping that while Pakistan keeps on convincing Taliban to actually see a reason, the Irani side should also be doing it, because until and unless all neighbors of Afghanistan actually push Taliban to concede some space, that is not going to happen. If that doesn't happen, Afghanistan will not get the kind of concessions it needs from the world, and the result will be unmitigated disaster.
Yeah,
Mr. Yes,
if I could be allowed, as Brother Tariq has rightly earlier mentioned, the Taliban regime is actually busy countering other affairs, and of course humanitarian crises are there, and their trade is there. They want to have trade with Iran, Pakistan, through Pakistan, elsewhere, so that they can adjust the economy. Economy is the biggest hurdle for them. But and he rightly pointed out that they will not be able to do anything against ISIS Khorasan or TTP. Then I just want to ask, should Pakistan or Iran or any other country that is facing terrorism from ISIS Khorasan and TTP, should they be talking straight away to Taliban that if they are busy doing that, why can't they allow these countries to enter in and do their job? Because constantly, of course, Pakistan and maybe Iran also, they are getting affected by this menace of terrorism based in Afghanistan, based in Kunnar, based in obviously Nangarhar.
And I'm going to let Farhadi Saab answer that, but a very quick counter question to Faisal here. Weren't you actually telling earlier in one of the earliest programs that Afghanistan is a graveyard of invaders and no country should be invaded?
I'm not talking about invasion. I'm just talking about surgical strikes. I'm just talking about the surgical strikes because this will be eventually good for Afghanistan as well, for sustainability of Afghanistan.
All right, let's hear Mr. Farhadi's view.
No, I mean, the Taliban can do it if they wanted. They don't need any help on that, but they don't want to alienate these people. And we are very sensitive to other neighbors coming inside Afghanistan. You have seen the events of the last few days. And also surgical strikes. The Americans tried to do surgical strikes in the last 20 years. It didn't help. These people are all over the country. They have been there for the 30, 40 years. Some of them have married. Some of them are inactive. They are there. But I think what really will bring security to the neighbors of Afghanistan is a little bit more stability with the government in Afghanistan. The Taliban have to really open up and bring other forces in the government, make it a larger government, get the international recognition, get some financial aid to get the economy going, and then they can do the surgical strike themselves.
Mr. Farhadi, my last question is, when we see that this perhaps, even though you started off with saying that this is not as significant a step towards the involvement of the regime in Afghanistan, but the fact that they actually did go to a foreign country with a proper delegation, does this actually pave way to more such delegation level visits from the Taliban regime in various countries, and then of course increase the kind of engagement that the world community is right now engaging with the Taliban?
Not necessarily. The only people who are stuck with the Taliban are the neighbors of Afghanistan.
Okay.
Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. The others are further. What happens in Afghanistan really is not going to affect them. But the good and bad comes from Afghanistan to the neighbors and from the neighbors to Afghanistan. So this is really a short range of traveling. But I don't see the Taliban going even to Istanbul because there's nothing to discuss. The Turkish told the Taliban you have to change on the way you deal with women's rights. And the Qataris told the Taliban the same. So everyone is disappointed. We have to have internal conversations inside Afghanistan and tell Taliban what I was telling in a debate run by a lady on Shamshad News, which is a channel run in the morning by ladies. I said, look, I have read the Quran from top to bottom. I haven't seen anywhere where there's a limitation on the education of women. So if Taliban are talking to us about an Islamic movement, they have to explain this to me. It doesn't make sense, a lot of the things they are doing, and we have to have these discussions with them seriously.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Tariq Farhadi, for joining us in the debate. It's always nice to have you and, of course, get your enlightening views as well. With the kind of situation, of course, that is going on around the world, both with regards to Afghanistan and India, one thing's for sure, whenever we look for change, it is a slow, hard process, and it's going to come with a lot of struggle, a lot of consistent effort. But we can only hope that that is still done by the people, by the senior voices, by countries like ours, that understand that there is a legitimate need for peace, and it's important for everyone, not just for the people in other parts of the world. And if we see actual changes taking place, then perhaps eventually a major change will also take place. Thank you very much for joining us in the debate. I'll see you tomorrow at 9.